Normally, I don't start Bee-otch of the day with good news, but I need to start with good news. It looks like 89X is coming back. The legendary alternative rock station that was technically out of Windsor, Ontario. And then about 5 years ago, it went to country. So, the station is CIMX legally. And so the story goes like this. 89X debuted in 1991. The very first song they played was Stop by Jane's Addiction. And throughout the 1990s and 2000s and 2010s, they were the go-to station for alternative rock in the Motor City. And they developed a good following. It wasn't the highest rated station in town, but the station did have some turnouts over the years. They did, sometimes they played some very wimpy, shitty music, like a lot of alternative stations do. And of course, they were forced to play CanCon that didn't really, that didn't necessarily reach a good audience. But it was what it was. And 89X was popular enough to spawn a ton of knockoff stations like Planet 96.3 and The Edge at 105.1, which was created by the folks who created the riff. 94.3 The Bone. Remember The Bone? It was a little translator station, actually. So what happened was 5 years ago. So the bullshit started when 89X was forced to shut down their Detroit offices in studio. And allegedly the Canadian government played a role. They frowned on the fact that they had a studio. So the Canadian government does not like when a station targets Americans. They basically tell Canadian TV and radio stations, you produce a product by Canadians for Americans. So, as a result, 89X fired all their all their American DJs and salespeople. Like 20-odd people were left jobless as a result, which I thought was sad. But anyway, of course, one of the people fired was the great Christina, the host of one of my favorite shows on 89X, Time Warp. And she played a lot of stuff that even satellite radio never touched. A lot of great stuff played on that program. So, anyway, the last song that was played... So, this is what happened. 89X actually flipped to active rock for a couple of years. And then they went... And then it was announced that this, both 89X and 93.9 The River, which was adult alternative, was going to change format. So, what happened was both stations changed format in November 2020. So 89X became a country station, Pure Country 89, and The River became Virgin Radio, and they were both network stations created by Mill Media. So the rest of the story goes like this. Shortly after 89X kicked the bucket, they, guess what happened? 98.7, which was an adult contemporary station, they flipped format to, guess what? They went from a they were actually playing Christmas music, but they were adult contemporary, and they became an alternative station, Alt 98.7. So anyway, so the rest of the story was that 98.7 became Alt 98.7, and 5 years later, their ratings are neck and neck, believe it or not, with the Riff. So that's good news on their part. So, and meanwhile, from the looks of things, 88.7's ratings aren't that great. It's like, why would a country music fan go left of the dial to listen to their music? And not only that, Detroiters are pretty loyal to 99.5 anyway. I mean, they've always been. Detroit, I think, is just a town that can only support one country station and one country station only. It is what it is. It's not a, big-ass rural community like, hell, even here in Grand Rapids, there's only one decent country station, B93, and of course, Thunder Country, 107.3 is a piece of shit with no ratings. So here's what's going on right now. So last weekend, somebody pointed out that Bell Media applied for an ISP address, 89x.com and .ca. And to add on to the speculation, right now, as I'm speaking, 88.7, they're still playing country music, but in between songs, they are airing these strange promos in Spanish with a lady announcer, and she's basically saying, like, listen to this station on August 28th at 8:08 a.m. And so that is leading to speculation that 89X will be making its big comeback. So, and the reason why some people are saying that 89X will be coming back is, well, it's because the announcements are made in Spanish by a lady, and, if you are a fan of Jane's Addiction, you know that Stop by Jane's Addiction begins with a lady talking in Spanish. So, there you go. However, don't rule out that 88.7 will be going back to 89X. And let me tell you why. So, it turns out that, I was reading on a message board that one person is speculating that EDM might actually be a choice for 88.7. And here's the reason why. Now they're saying that 8:08 will be the time on August 28th, that's this upcoming Thursday, that the station, changes will happen and an announcement will be made. So, what's going on? So here's the thing. 808 was a drum machine made by Roland that was a very popular drum machine used by EDM musicians. And Detroit is a very big electronic music town. As a matter of fact, EDM was actually pretty big in Detroit even before I was even born, which was 1981. There have been a couple of songs. Yeah, there was this guy, the Electrifying Mojo. Yeah, he was on WGPR in Detroit, and he had a nighttime show. The guy had monster ratings, and he played a lot of, funk and disco and new wave on his show, and yes, even EDM, early electronic music. So, anyway, the rest of the story was, so that, and, there's a couple of EDM stations in Canada. So don't count EDM out either. And it is a good guess, but the barometer at this point is screaming the return of the X. And I would believe that if 89X does come back, it will focus on its glory days in the 1990s. I think that would be cool. A 90s focused alternative format. Which, and some heritage alternative stations have done such a thing. Like 91X over in San Diego, for an example. They went classic alternative. Although they still have room for 1 or 2 currents per hour. So, fingers crossed that 89X will come back. I know a lot of people miss 89X, but what happens. I mean, the Canadian government is such a clusterfuck versus the FCC. I mean, in some cases or another. So, anyway, but now the bad news. Well, a classic alternative station is preparing, allegedly, to come back on the air. Another station is definitely going by the wayside. WLUM 102.1 Milwaukee, along with its adult contemporary sister station B93.3, are both being sold for $4 million. So the story goes like this. Both stations are owned by a company called the Milwaukee Radio Alliance. And Milwaukee Radio Alliance is actually a consortium of 2 companies. One is called Times Shamrock. They own a ton of newspapers and radio stations. They're based out of Pennsylvania. I believe they once owned a radio station. They owned the Howard Stern affiliate in Austin, Texas, KGFK 98.9. Then they sold the station to somebody else, and they were like, we don't want Howard Stern on here anymore. So they turned it to a format called Rock AC, which is basically soft classic rock. And anyway, the rest of the story was they also owned the Metro Times in Detroit. They owned a bunch of newspapers. So anyway, Time Shamrock and the other party is the family of NFL Hall of Famer Willie Davis. So the story was that back in 1979, Willie Davis, who was a Green Bay Packer, had 2 Super Bowl trophies. He, of course, retired from football and got into broadcasting. He purchased several radio stations in both California and Wisconsin. He purchased, I believe, that before it flipped format, 102.1 in Milwaukee was actually a gospel station, and it had no listeners. So Willie flipped the FM to disco and gave it a new call sign, WLUM, We Love You Milwaukee. And so anyway, what happened was the station was originally disco, and it was 1979, disco was at its peak, and then disco kind of died off, and so it became a rhythmic top 40 station, and it was either number 1 in the ratings or close to it. And it did pretty well for many years, and then a tragedy happened. A high school principal was murdered by one of his students. And allegedly, and what had happened was it was noted that the student, who was a black boy, I think it was like 19 years old. He was a huge fan of gangster rap music. And in the early 90s, gangster rap was under fire for being violent and crude and, anti-woman. And obviously, the guy was a huge fan of rap music. So what happened was there was a huge pressure put on WLUM and other top 40 stations to get rid of rap and hip hop from the playlist. So so this is what happened. Willie Davis finally decided it was time to put WLUM under the microscope, which he did, and what he found was really hurt him. What happened was he found out that at 10 o'clock every night, the station would play a full hour of uncensored rap and hip-hop music. And a lot of the stuff was definitely not FCC friendly. And so Willie really took a look at the station and noticed they were playing way too much stuff like this. And he told the station, okay, you got to stop playing this, you got to stop playing that. And he was really trying to take a stand for his station. And then finally, he decided, why not go alternative? A lot of stations at the time were ditching top 40 for alternative because, it was still reaching a young audience. And, it wasn't really alienating high schoolers at all. A lot of high school kids loved alternative. They were worshiping the ground Kurt Cobain walked on, and that's what people wanted to hear. It was, grunge was still somewhat popular. Of course, Kurt Cobain had just passed away. And, it was alternative's glory days, quite frankly. So, anyway, as the years progressed, WLUM had some kind of alternative format. Sometimes they were adult alternative, AAA, and then sometimes they were actually active rock. They were playing active rock, hard rock and metal. But all truth be told, they were a new rock-focused station. And they still did pretty well in the ratings, but this time around they were number 10. So anyway, the rest of the story was that so Willie Davis died a couple of years ago. I mean, I think it was like 86 when he died. It was 2020 when he died. And I guess he told his family, please, for the love of God, don't sell the stations. But then what happened was somebody came to them and said that I have an offer that you cannot refuse. And guess who just bought WLUM and B93.3 for $4 million? K-Love! That's right, good old Christian K-Love has purchased WLUM in Milwaukee, and it will probably become a Jesus station. It will definitely become a Jesus station, trust me. This is the same K-Love that killed off WLUP Chicago, WCCC Hartford, Connecticut. That was one of Howard Stern's early stomping grounds, and they became a Stern affiliate themselves in later years. They also killed off WPLJ in New York. They were actually a adult contemporary, hot adult contemporary station. And they were a rock station in the 70s and 80s. Wine, port, and lemon juice. That's what the letters WPLJ stood for. It was an old, it was an old doo-wop song from the 50s. And then Frank Zappa actually later covered it. That's where the call sign came from. WAAF Boston, even 102.7 in Detroit, which back in the 90s was the great Z-Rock, is now a K-Love affiliate. So there's actually two radio stations that make up K-Love. K-Love themselves and Air One, which sounds like a British format, but it's not. Air One is actually worship music. You know, if you go to a mega church on Sunday morning, you know, they play these stupid, god-awful songs that's just 8 lines repeated 8 times, the 8x8 songs. And that's what it is. And then, of course, K-Love is basically Christian contemporary music for soccer moms. So what they do is they tell their listeners, oh, we need money. We need you to give us, you know, we're in danger of shutting down. If you don't give to us, Jesus is going to hate you. They do this. And people will give them money, and then they come up, then they make millions, and they just buy up every fucking radio station they want. And one of their targets are rock stations. And they have killed a lot of rock stations. I don't even think in Boston anymore there's a station in town that plays any type of new rock music. And of course, Milwaukee, you know, when WLUM signs out for good, you know, it's going to, you know, Milwaukee's going to be a 2 rock station town. They're going to have a classic rock station, and then there's a station called The Hog, 102.9, which, by the way, was an active rock station years ago, but now they are one of those stations that, you know, do play some newer rock music from like 10, 15 years ago, but that's it. It's like, I fucking hate radio stations that do that. They tell you that they're the rock station, and they haven't updated their playlist in 10, 15 years. WIOT in Toledo is like that. And their idea, and you know, that's what corporate media is all about. They're like, rock is dead. Oh, nobody's going to go. Okay. Do me a favor and go to our rock festival here in Grand Rapids, Upheaval. Monster crowds every fucking year. Falling in Reverse played, and Rob Zombie, Wage War. All these bands are very popular. And it sucks that major cities have all rejected those bands because they don't fit the format anymore. iHeartMedia, formerly Clear Channel, Town Square Media, Cumulus, all these big companies don't give a fuck about rock fans. And now, you know, you got so many major cities. Even New York City doesn't have a new rock station. What the fuck? You know, and I understand. Corporate radio kicked themselves in the ass when they decided to kill off those formats. And it was like, you know, and the listeners are like, you know, let's take our business to satellite radio and Spotify and whatever that's out there. And I'm not going to lie. They do a fucking better job than corporate radio does. They don't care, you know, it's like, you know, look at Northern Michigan, where I'm from. Back in the 90s, KLT wouldn't give the time of day to most of my favorite bands of the time. Korn, Tool, Rage Against the Machine. Nah, we're not going to play those bands. Oh, we got the latest from the Goo Goo Dolls. You like the Goo Goo Dolls, Chuck? How about Matchbox 20? Oh, they actually said shit in one of their songs, and we played it uncensored because the FCC didn't care at the time. Ay vey. And I laugh at the Goki family. Look at what happened. They had 6 radio stations in northern Michigan. And they shat the bed way too many times. If they didn't make one mistake, it was another. And KLT was the only station they had that actually had good, decent ratings. And when it became time to sell their stations, only 2 stations they owned stayed with commercial broadcasters. KLT at 97.5 and 106.7, which went to McDowell Garber Broadcasting, which in turn became a country station called Star Country. Of course, the other KLT station at 98.9 up in Petoskey, that was bought by K-Love and then became an Air One station. And guess what? It only, in the Northern Michigan ratings book, it was at a 0.4. Nobody fucking listens to this station. Nobody. 94.3, which used to be one of the Fox stations in Leland, that actually went to Central Michigan University. Let's see here. 105.5 over in Honor by Traverse City. That was a former ESPN station. That was actually sold to originally Good News Media, but then that became Northern Christian Radio. It's one of their stations now. And 92.5. Now, it was originally sold to a guy named Bill Gleish. Bill is one of the owners of Sovereign Communications in the UP, along with Tim Sabian. Yes, the Tim Sabian, as in the guy who really helped to make Howard Stern a big star by being the programming director at WYSP Philadelphia. And, of course, the former programmer of Howard 100. And what happened was Bill had a lot of problems. He got busted for drunk driving. He spent some time in the Hokie. Sovereign Communications was forced to sell their Marquette stations. They weren't making any money. They've had tax issues because their studio in Sault Ste. Marie was sold on the courthouse steps. I mean, yeah. I mean, these people don't know how to manage jack shit. And then on top of that, Bill tried to buy 92.5. Rumor had it that he wanted to buy 1110 AM and WJML in Petoskey. Start a brand new WJML, and it never went through. And so guess what Bill had to do? He sold it to Northern Christian Radio, and shortly after the sale was consummated, during the great ice storm of earlier this year, the transmitter crashed to the ground because of all the ice. Yeah. And what I heard was that a lot of these Holy Roller stations in Northern Michigan, they lost their transmitters during, transmission sites and all these, ice storms in Northern Michigan earlier this year. And, I'm like, sucks to be them. So 3 out of the 6 stations the Gokis had are now in the hands of Jesus. So that's unfortunate. And now corporate radio, they're making, like I said, if they can't make one mistake, they will make another. Because their head is so far up their ass, they don't know where to begin. And, when I think about Willie Davis, there was a rumor that I heard that Willie, unfortunately, wanted his family to not sell a station. And now, but K-Love simply said that they had a deal that they couldn't refuse, and They were probably even telling them, look, if Willie sold those stations 20 years ago, he probably would have fetched $10 million. And now they're only worth 4. And radio is just going to get worse and worse afterward. And I'm like, well, no shit. So all I can say about that is, radio just, it's like I've long drifted to the world of Sirius. And of course, if Howard does re-sign with Sirius for another 5 years, I'll stick with it. Even though I still think that, the show isn't as good as it once was. I still think, though, that if I had to choose between Howard Stern or Free Beer and Hot Wings, Howard would definitely win. Because fuck terrestrial radio. Big time. Especially after what they did to him. And, bowing to these religious nuts. I mean, back to Free Beer and Hot Wings for a split second. It's so sad that all these years, the religious right, which included the DeVos family, tried their damnedest to get Howard Stern off the air in Grand Rapids. And they succeeded, obviously, because, Citadel, what they did was they ordered Howard off all their stations. And then, of course, 97.9 added on Free Beer and Hot Wings. And people are like, oh, this is a good show. Oh, these guys are funny. Oh, they're brilliant. And I go to Van Andel Arena, and if you order a beer, guess what it comes in? In a Free Beer and Hot Wings GRD cup. And all these schmucks have ever done in their lives is take the Stern Show and make it their own. Just another bunch of fucked up clones. But that's the way it is, folks. I just get so sad and upset that, this is how radio is. It's poorly managed. They don't listen to the listeners. It's all egomaniacal losers running the show. And at the end of the day, they're the ones who lose. They're the ones who are being forced to sell their stations because they can't turn a fucking profit. And, and of course, they've done a great job of chasing their listeners away by, telling them what they'll listen to. It is what it is. And, as long as you pay, if you can, if you want to, pay X amount of dollars per month for Sirius XM, or even if you want to listen to Spotify, which, where you're forced to, they're going to play a bunch of commercials every 2 songs you listen to. I mean, that's up to you. But the rest of the story is, you got to remember how K-Love makes their money. They will tell their listeners, gimme, 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 and they will get it. It's not, to me, it's not about honoring Jesus. It's about honoring their pocketbooks. Because they are a nonprofit organization, and I'll bet you that the people who run this company will, go through loopholes to own mansions and homes and yada, yada, yada. Okay? So, there you go. It's all about power, And you got to realize who keeps these people on the air. And it's these idiots who get so brainwashed into thinking that, that they're in danger of closing, and they're not. I mean, if you can afford $4 million to buy a couple of radio stations in Milwaukee, you got money. Okay? And, if there's more and more people quitting radio and whatever business, that's the way it is. I mean, currently, as a matter of fact, the number 1 radio station in Milwaukee is a conservative talk station, WISN. So, anyway, WLUM WLUM, we hardly knew ye. May you rest in peace. I am King Chuck. Good day, good luck. Have a good day, everyone. I will talk to you on the flip side.